And my first special guest in our continuing coverage on the West Asia conflict is none other than Shashi Tharoor. He is, of course, chairperson of the Standing Committee on External Affairs, seasoned diplomat and member of parliament. Appreciate your joining us, Dr. Tharoor. Your first big takeaway for what's happened now with a week into the war. Do you believe that this war is now becoming increasingly an escalating conflict that could get other countries, including India, in some way or the other within its ambit?
No, I don't think we're going to get, in any case, dragged into the conflict. But what's happening is the consequences of the conflict are already affecting us and many other countries besides. Because what's happening right now is that oil prices have already started spiking. It was about $65 per barrel before the war started. It's already up at 83 when I last checked, and maybe climbing further. Gas supplies, Qatar is one of the world's leading gas suppliers. They've declared force majeure, which means they are out of all their contracts. Factories from India to Korea are going to suddenly find themselves without gas. There are some very serious consequences affecting people already because of this war. And we've already had people affected because of the closure of airports in the Gulf, travelers being stranded, others being unable to move, businesses being affected, people working from home. I mean, lives all around. We're a country with 9 to 10 million of our nationals in the Gulf. For us, this is something that really does affect their lives and their ability to do well, send remittances home, all of that. So we can't be indifferent. It is very much in our interest to demand de-escalation and diplomacy, no question about that. But when you speak of getting involved, I don't think we mean it militarily. There would be no reason for any other country to enter a conflict, because that would simply prolong it.
No, when I say India's involvement, I mean in terms of the fact that India will in some way or the other face the repercussions of what's happening in West Asia, both the large number of Indians who live in the region, as well as you said, energy security. But therefore, what role precisely do you see Shashi Tharoor, India playing? Because your own party, the Congress, has once again raised questions over strategic autonomy, because the United States is saying they will allow India to have a 30-day waiver when it comes to purchases of oil from Russia. Your own party seems to suggest that this is India's strategic autonomy being diluted by Washington, Washington playing the big bully or the superpower in a way. Do you agree that India, in a way, needs to send a tougher message to Washington that, look, we are not going to follow your diktats?
Well, the problem is the consequences if we don't. I think that for the companies that are purchasing Russian oil and putting it into their refineries, without that waiver, they get subject to sanctions which affect all their businesses. So there is, to my mind, a choice that has to be made. There is no doubt that the sanctions imposed by the US and indeed by the EU have not received any authorization from the UN Security Council, and therefore they are sanctions by individual countries. They don't have the sanctity of international law. But at the same time, you have to be realistic. If the sanctions mean that your companies will risk being frozen out of the world markets, frozen out of the American or European markets, then you won't want to buy Russian oil, because your companies have an interest in being able to function that way. And for those reasons, I think you must understand that it is imperative for these companies to heed the sanctions, and the waiver will have come as a big relief to them. With that waiver, they can openly purchase for those 30 days, knowing that those purchases will be exempt from any negative consequences for their companies.
But in a way, is this all now boiling down to America playing the big bully, Israel wanting dominant power over West Asia, and Iran, in a way, also having a regime that's battling for its life? How do you see this in the context of the power politics that's playing out in the region? Do you believe that this is a just war, as the United States, Donald Trump reiterated today?
Look, the tenets of international law are very clear, that there is no justification for using force against a sovereign member state of the UN, except in self-defense, which cannot be invoked in this particular case, or with Security Council authorization, which does not exist in this case, the logic of preemptive self-defense, which is something that has been cited by apologists for this war, saying that if we hadn't done it, the Iranians would have developed a nuclear weapon and attacked us first. That preemptive logic doesn't really hold up when the Omani negotiators, who've been mediating talks between the Americans and the Iranians, claim that the Iranians had already agreed to no nukes, zero enriched uranium stockpiles, and other steps that would have essentially eliminated the threat of a nuclear weapon from Iran. The only thing that was delaying the conclusion of those negotiations was Iran wanted, in return for those assurances, to receive structured sanctions relief from the West, because as you know, Iranian oil is already sanctioned by the West, and we, for example, have stopped buying Iranian oil because of that, just as we're under pressure to stop buying Russian oil now. So those sanctions were a potent force already before all of this. And that's something that we can't afford to ignore.
No, so should we have reiterated that principle that you just spoke about territorial sovereignty, about
I think
about the fact that you can't just go into another country and assassinate its head of state, its religious head? Do you believe that India should be drawing certain red lines, or it's best done through quiet diplomacy rather than making any pronouncements?
Look, that's a call each individual government has to take. As you may have seen, very few governments have had the courage to stand up and condemn the American action. Of course, countries in the Arab and Islamic world to some degree have done so. Not all of them, but some have. And in the Western world, Spain, I think, is pretty much alone in saying this was an illegal and unjustified action. Many other countries have felt that condemning this war would put them on the wrong side of a US government, which has not hesitated to show its displeasure in ways that have really hurt many countries.
So do you agree with that? Do you agree with that position, that we should not be seen to antagonize the Trump administration? Is Donald Trump arrogating for himself the right to decide which country he's going to invade? One day it's Venezuela, one day it's Iran, and here he's got Israel driving it. Do you believe that we should be standing for certain principles or not?
Rajdeep, I've said this in the past, that we have always stood for certain principles in world affairs. The Panchsheel Doctrine enunciates all these principles also. The UN Charter does so. But there are 193 countries which could say it. How many of them have stood up and said it? And why don't they do so? Because they have made a calculation, which is the prerogative of a sovereign government, that they have bigger fish to fry, there are bigger interests at stake in these relationships, and that if the price of articulating such a principled condemnation of the American action is that they will antagonize an America they feel they can't afford to antagonize on other issues, then as a government, they can decide not to do this. Look, we took the same line on Russia. You remember that in Parliament, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, I criticized the government of India for not articulating these principles and condemning the Russian invasion. A couple of years later, when our Prime Minister went to Moscow and hugged President Putin, and went to Kyiv 2 weeks later and hugged President Zelensky, I had to admit that his silence turned out to have the strategic benefit that we were able to keep open channels of communication to both sides in that conflict. So you have to, it's difficult for us sitting outside a government to second guess their choices.
No, but that's precisely the question, if I may push you, but that's precisely the question. Your own party today is saying government has ceded its strategic autonomy. Do you agree with that? Or do you believe that, that the government retains the choices that it must make in situations like that, whether we should condole Ali Khamenei's death, whether we should speak out against an Iranian warship that has been sunk in Indian Ocean? Are these decisions best left to government, or do you believe the opposition has the right to say that strategic autonomy is being eroded, that the Narendra Modi government is surrendering, to use the words of Rahul Gandhi?
Rajdeep, the opposition's job is to oppose, and I have no doubt that if we had been in the government and had taken the choice that this government has now taken, they in the opposition would have said the same thing to us. That is how democracies work. I don't think that right now, sitting here and looking at that in that context is particularly relevant. It's a question of how we can protect our national interests. Sovereign autonomy is a means of protecting our national interests. I will say, however, that expressing condolences on the assassination of a head of state is a normal thing to do, and I'm very glad that our government has expressed those condolences, and the foreign secretary was sent to the Iranian embassy to sign the official book of condolences. That is the right thing to do. And I will say that as far as the courtesies and between states are concerned, don't forget that we have full diplomatic relations with Iran. There's an ambassador here, and our foreign minister telephoned his Iranian counterpart while he also spoke to his Israeli counterpart. This is India trying to show that they've got channels of communication open to both countries. And I think you really have to respect the choices the government has made as choices that they deem at that point to be in the best interests of India, given that there would be consequences for other choices. At the end of the day, Rajdeep, we in the opposition will always have reason to criticize. We attacked the government when 50% tariffs were imposed on us. We've attacked the government when other decisions were made by other countries. So when our government does something to prevent that kind of retaliation from those countries, when we attack, we're being the opposition, and that's right. That's how democracies function. But I don't think that's the real issue here. The real issue is the first question you asked: how is India affected? What is India's interest? And I would say to you, India's interest is in ending this war as soon as possible. And if we get more influence on those who are conducting this war by not condemning them publicly, then that is something that we might want to do when we're in government. And we might not want to do when we're in opposition.
Which brings me to my final question. When you say ending the war, you spent a long time of your diplomatic career at the United Nations. The United Nations seems powerless to stop this war. All multilateralism seems to have evaporated. And it seems that the United States has arrogated, as I said, to itself the right to decide how this war is to be conducted. Donald Trump today saying that he expects an unconditional surrender from Iran and a regime change of preferably his choice. Where does this leave the world and the United Nations? Conflicts seem impossible to resolve, whether it's Ukraine, Iran, or indeed earlier Gaza. Do you believe the United Nations is completely powerless, impotent, and defunct now?
Well, let's not go quite that far, because there's more to the UN than one particular conflict.
But in terms of conflict resolution?
Let me say, Rajdeep, first of all, we are going through a crisis when it comes to international law, because the fact is that the whole premise of international law and the world order that was established after the Second World War was that power would be tamed by law, would be subject to law, and that any use of power would have to be justified in terms of law. That has been cast to the winds in recent years by many players. Russia's violation of international law in attacking Ukraine, America's violation of international law in attacking Iraq in 2003, and now attacking Iran. I mean, the truth is there have been violations. Israel has violated many principles of international law in its campaign in Gaza. So the fact is, international law is now being buffeted about by those who have the power to disregard its consequences. Does that mean the UN is out of the window? No, it means that in situations where member states that are powerful enough that either are permanent members of the Security Council or enjoy the protection of permanent members of the Security Council, when they take certain steps, the UN cannot stop them because the Security Council has that structure. But that doesn't mean that the law ceases to be relevant. It means that we acknowledge that it is being disregarded in this particular context. We try and live with the consequences to the extent we have to, but we try and reclaim that ground when this conflict is over, so that the next crisis will not lead to this kind of violation. The UN is literally the only organization in the world that collects all the countries of the world together on one forum to discuss these global issues. We can't afford to jettison it. It's not doing very well on this particular issue. It can be of use to India and to the rest of the world on various other issues. Let's not discard the UN over this crisis, but let us admit it is congenitally, chronically unable to act in a situation where a permanent member is on the warpath.
May I ask you one final question on this, which is that, do you sense, based on the last week, have we tilted too far towards placating the Israel-American axis at the cost of Iran? Do you believe that we need to therefore maintain a much tighter balance given our interests in the region? Or do you believe that we need to be seen to be with the winning side, as some call it, with the more powerful side, Do you believe that we've tilted far too much towards Israel and America or not?
Well, we have not applauded this action. We have not endorsed this action. So in that sense,
But we've not condemned it either.
we have not condemned it either. Similarly, we have kept open lines of communication to Iran, and we have expressed a hope that matters will be resolved very quickly. That seems to be the choice that we have made. Now, you could ask yourself, why not condemn it? The question is, if we condemn it, what good does it do to Iran? Are we going to send them weapons? We're not. Are we going to support them in the conflict? We're not. So the condemnation is cheap, it's words. But in the process, do we lose leverage over the West? Do we lose leverage over the US? Look at other countries in an analogous situation and the silences they've kept. I mean, you have to understand, Rajdeep, academics, journalists, and outsiders can always take a stand of principle. I've articulated the principles for you. But as a government, what does the Indian government need to do to ensure that there are no consequences from the stand it takes for the people of India and the interests of India? If I were in government or advising government, those are the questions that would be uppermost in my mind too.
Right.
So I find it difficult to sit here outside the government and say, I want the government to say all these things, because the government then has to live with the consequences. And if the consequences are we get 50% sanctions again on India, then my job as opposition would be to say, look at this hopeless government, they've given us 50% sanctions once more. So you have to understand, governments make choices all the time. And we, as an alternative party of government, we also have to think about what we would do if we were in power.
I think there's a message in what you've said, both for the government and indeed for your own party and the opposition. But Shashi Tharoor, for joining me ahead of your 70th birthday. I know you turned 70 on the 9th of March. I don't want to remind you about that, but I know that you've got a big couple of days coming up.
I've just been launching Dr. Karan Singh's biography, and he turns 95 on the 9th of March. So we have a quarter of a century between us, and it's been fascinating. It's a great date. And since you're a cricket fan, I believe the wicketkeeper Parthiv Patel also shares that birthday with us.
Well,
So
speaking about cricket and Shashi Tharoor, at the moment, Sanju Samson is probably the most popular Thiruvananthapuramite, if I may call it, ahead of you, Dr. Tharoor, and I hope that...
I'm happy to yield place to him. Let him continue earning that on Sunday too.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shashi Tharoor, for joining me here on the news today.
All the best. Thanks, Ajit.